Aloha, namaskar, and hello. Welcome to Climate Change Beyond Outrage, where we go beyond outrage to focus on solutions to climate problems facing people, nations, and the world. I am your host, Anu Hittel, broadcasting live from ThinkTech Studios in beautiful downtown Honolulu. There are many ways for you to get talking with us. You can join our conversation by tweeting us at ThinkTechHI, and now you can call us at 415-871-2474. Once we are done with the show, don't feel bereft. Join our conversation on our Facebook page of the same name, Climate Change Beyond Outrage. Today's episode is about a very special place. Papahānaumokuākea National Marine Monument is the single largest conservation area under the US flag, and one of the largest marine conservation areas in the world. The monument contains numerous islands and atolls and covers 140,000 square miles of the Pacific Ocean. This is an area larger than all the country's national parks combined. It was established in 2006 to forever protect and perpetuate ecosystem health and diversity and Native Hawaiian cultural significance of Papahānaumokuākea. This special place has not been exempt from the effects of climate change, and although climate change was not part of the original plans for the monument, it has been a center stage issue for the past few years. An action plan has emerged, and today I have two of the managers in the studio to help us understand how they are responding to climate changes and challenges. Keola Lindsey works for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and is the Papahānaumokuākea Program Manager. Keola has represented the Office of Hawaiian Affairs in the co-management of Papahanaumokuakea since 2009 and is originally from Waimea on Hawaii Island and now lives in Kailua, Oahu with his family. Dan Polhemus has been the manager of the Aquatic Ecosystem Conservation Program for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the Pacific since 2010. He has served several terms as the chair of the Monument Management Board for Papahanaumokuakea in both state and federal roles and is currently the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Ecological Services representative to that board. Keola and Dan, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us on.
So what took so long to get climate change into the picture, and now that we're there, what's happening?
Well, if you think about it, the monument was only created in 2006. And so we're 10 years down the line, but we started out having to craft a management plan. And that initial management plan at the time didn't have a specific component for climate change, partly because climate change effects weren't quite as severe as we're seeing them now. And around 2013, the co-managers of the monument jointly determined that, in fact, climate change was probably the largest single ecological threat to the integrity of the monument as a whole, and therefore set up a climate change working group to address that problem and to help them in producing a climate change action plan for to guide future management in the reserve. So that group had several workshops over a period of years. We brought in aggregate, several hundred experts on climate, ranging from government scientists to academics, graduate students, and also non-governmental sector people. And we then, in just this year, January 2016, were able to complete that document, presented it to the board for approval, and at this point it's in the process of final approval by all the members.
And so what has been the state's role, Keola, in all of this?
I think as one of the co-managers of the monument, we participated, like Dan said, in the early workshops, integrating some of the subject matter experts into those forums so they can share their knowledge. And of course, as the plan was working its way through the management board review process, OHA and the other two state agencies involved were part of the review, discussion, and endorsement at the MMB level. And we're standing by to assist however we can to get that plan towards finalization.
And of course, we'll talk more about that, how that co-management works later on in this episode. But I just wanted to step back and say, so OHA is the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And so we just wanted to spell out any of the acronyms that we end up using.
Right.
A lot of jargon in this business, right?
And of course, the other aspect of the monument that is very important is that we try to integrate both natural history and cultural considerations. And so one of the very important aspects of OHA is they bring a cultural perspective into resource management that's often very focused simply on science and organisms.
Right, and this is a little bit like what the Pacific Islands Climate Change Cooperative has been doing as well, which is trying to incorporate both the cultural as well as the natural resource side of things. And I understand that perhaps those are one and the same thing for Hawaiian culture.
Right, I think in the early years of the monument, when it was established in 2006, kind of our tagline was where nature and culture are one. That of course isn't limited to the Northwesterns, but I think as Papahanaumokuakea enters its second decade of management and existence, issues like climate change are going to become some of the challenges we face. And again, like Dan said, the co-management structure and all of us working together and really integrating all disciplines, whether it's Hawaiian, conventional science, conservation, ecology, that whole package needs to exist for us to address serious challenges like this.
So it would be interesting to take a look at a map of where the monument, what it actually covers, right? And I think we have a map somewhere, so if we could, when we get that up on the screen, we can...
To give you an idea of the size of the monument, if you laid it on the continental United States, it would extend from Atlanta, Georgia to Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's that big.
Right.
So it's 1,200 miles, 10 islands. If you fly from here to Midway, even on a jet, it's going to take you several hours to traverse the length of the monument.
Right.
So it's a very, very big place.
And that's something that we don't, we really can't get a grasp of sometimes, right? Because it's out in the water and it's not a place that we frequent. You don't have a lot of YouTube videos saying, oh, I went to Papahanaumokuakea, right?
No, I mean, by the very way the monument was set up under the presidential proclamation, it's largely a place that we've left to its own devices to more or less run itself. As managers, we can do certain things, but I mean, it's really, we only get up there to a very limited extent in any given year. In the winter, the sea's very rough, it's often hard for us to go. In summer, we've got ships and we can go around, but you know, a couple of NOAA research vessels are only going to cover so much distance. So largely we manage the monument, except at Midway where we have a full-time presence. We manage many of these islands as snapshots that we can catch every summer during our field seasons.
Right, and that's what happens at Kure Atoll as well, right, where the state has jurisdiction.
Right, yeah, so they have a field camp that they send folks out there for 6 months at a time and then do a field switch. And you know, the monument, the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands, has a tremendous history, a tremendous genealogy, going all the way back to, you know, traditional Hawaiian times, but all the way through, you know, the Hawaiian Kingdom era, has a very important role in, you know, the buildup of whaling in the Pacific, of agriculture, you know, the guano mining that's happened on the islands, unique military history with the Battle of Midway. So it's quite a package of significance that, again, the co-management structure has a tremendous benefit to bring all those together with everyone at the table to try and figure out how we deal with such a vast area in the Northwest.
And it's a vast area, but also very rich area, very rich in wildlife. We have some photos here of coral reefs and so on that and maybe we could get those up on the screen. And I thought maybe you could speak a little bit more to the, well, we'll get this picture later, maybe if we could get one of the fish that are all over. But I thought maybe if you could speak a little more to what exactly the Climate Action Plan addresses.
Well, the first thing we needed to do was to understand essentially what sort of impacts, what sort of drivers were pushing climate change in the monument, and so what sort of impacts we were likely to sustain from them. And obviously carbon dioxide is increasing in the atmosphere, the ocean is getting warmer, the air is getting warmer, precipitation patterns are changing, patterns of ocean circulation are changing, the very chemistry of the ocean itself is changing. And so all of these are things that we need to measure, we need to understand, and then we can look and see what kind of impacts they might have. And these fall into a couple of broad categories. For us, I think the most concerning is rising sea level, because many of our islands are quite low. And so as sea level rises, if it comes up, it's projected to come up 1 meter by the end of the century. There are certain islands that are currently above water in Papahānaumokuakea that simply will not be underwater in the year 2100 if those trends play out as predicted.
That will be underwater.
They will be underwater, without a doubt. You know,
Yeah.
some of our places, say for instance French frigate shoals, that's the major breeding site for nearly all of our green sea turtles that you see down here in the main Hawaiian Islands. And yet the islands those turtles breed on are predicted to potentially be underwater by 2100. So there was a recent proposal to downlist green sea turtles under the Endangered Species Act. It had to be jointly decided on by both NOAA and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because that's a shared jurisdiction species. And one of the major reasons that the agencies decided not to support a downlisting was the projection that climate change would in fact significantly eliminate and displace breeding habitat.
Right, and so what will this do to some of the cultural resources? And that's part of the, I mean, part of the cultural resources are the animals and plant life and so on, but also beyond that, right? I mean, this is what the islands are themselves resources and sacred places for Hawaiians.
And I think Dan's mentioned just now of how the connectivity between these populated islands here and French frigate shoals in the case of the green sea turtles really highlights this idea of that area is connected to us, whether it's biologically and of course from the Native Hawaiian perspective. Those islands are of such significance that that's kind of where all life emerged out of in some of the genealogical chants. So those accounts describe kind of the evolution of life on Earth, right? Beginning with the coral polyp, which I guess science is also showing the importance of, you know, the elements of coral in life. So those are the kind of examples that show as we integrate disciplines together, we're really not that different from each other. We're really kind of driving at the same thing and understanding our world and then really trying to deal with the changes that are happening there.
Now, do you think, and this is open for either of you to answer, whoever is allowed to answer this, but you know, do you think that if we called it something other than climate change, that we actually would have made more progress on some of these issues? I feel like this is just as part of being a scholar, a researcher, and a teacher on this issue, that we've maybe taken an issue that is so broad and intractable just conceptually for people, that if we had just said, you know, listen, there's erosion happening and we need to address this, or, you know, there's a seawall is breaking down and it's part of the wave intensity and the frequency of storms. I mean, if we address the symptoms, or at least use the symptoms to address the larger problem, rather than just use the big words of climate change, which seem to be, you know, of course, in this country they're quite polarized, but not all over the world. But that's only one of the problems. I just wonder if it makes it so intractable. And what are your thoughts on that?
As a resource manager, I think they're all just various forms of change, that environmental change, that present challenges to managing this place in the way that was intended. And so sea level rise, no matter what was driving it, could be space aliens, would still be a challenge, right? Same way, the warming ocean and the fact that corals are now bleaching in the mine is still a challenge. And so I don't think the labels are important. I think what's really important in the end is just what's happening and how we can best respond to it.
And that's a perfect place for us to stop, because we'll come back and we'll talk about just what is happening in these islands and in that area and how managers are dealing with it at this point. So we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen. I'm the host of Likeable Science on Think Tech Hawaii. We talk about why people should like science, why science is actually fun, how science is a dynamic and vital part of everyone's life, why everyone, every man, woman, and child on the planet should really know science, should love science, should be familiar with science. So it's a great show. People come on here and have interesting conversations with us. They tell us why they do what they do, why they love it, why we should love it too. I hope you'll join us every Friday, 1 to 2 p.m. And of course, you can see it anytime on YouTube. Aloha.
Welcome back to Climate Change Beyond Outrage, and we are talking with Dan Polhemus of Fish and Wildlife Service and Keola Lindsey of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, who are in the studio with us today. So we were just speaking about sea level rise and warming seas and all of these effects on the ocean. What are the current challenges in the marine monument, and how are the managers dealing with this?
Well, I'd say, we mentioned the fact that sea level's coming up and we could lose some of the lower islands. Also, of course, the ocean's getting warmer, and so we've had some significant coral bleaching events. When the ocean gets too warm, the corals have small little symbiotic zooxanthellae in them that actually help the corals feed. It's a relationship between two organisms.
We just had the director of the Waikiki Aquarium who was
so
explaining that to us. Yes.
Okay.
So,
and the bottom line is that if it gets too hot, the corals expel those zooxanthellae, and then they turn white because those are giving the corals their color. And so in 2014, we had a very severe instance of coral bleaching in the monument, and at least in some areas, such as Lysianski Island, we lost up to 90% of our corals on the southeast side of Lysianski in that event. Yeah. So it's a very serious problem. We also have an increasing incidence of severe storms forming near the monument and passing through the monument. A couple of years ago, we had Hurricane Neki, for instance, that compelled us to evacuate everybody at French Frigate Shoals and Les Saints. And we actually, again, this last year, when we had so many tropical storms form in proximity to Hawaii, field crews went up there, got onto Les Saints, were there for a week, had to be pulled off, were taken to Midway for safety. They said, you can go back. They went back, they got pulled off within days as another tropical storm approached. This is not typical of past events in Papahānaumokuākea.
And of course, this coral bleaching is not only restricted to areas around here. I mean, we've been hearing a lot in the news about climate events, and especially coral bleaching in the Great Barrier Reef.
Yes.
So,
in fact, there have been studies that have modeled out into the future, and the projection is that by perhaps the middle of the century, every tropical reef in the world may bleach to some extent every year.
Right. Well, we've had other folks on this episode, on this series, who've mentioned that sometimes corals can actually come back from those bleaching events and so on. So there is some resilience.
There's adaptive capacity.
Right.
Corals. It's not absolutely a death sentence, but at the same time, this last year with El Nino, it turned out we didn't have so much of a problem in the monument with El Nino, but down at Maui and the Big Island, we just had a meeting with the state the other day to have a look at their data. And they lost 55% of the corals on the Kona coast of Big Island, and that's not just bleaching, they're dead.
So they're gone.
Yes.
Right. And so from the state's perspective, what do you see as challenges at this point?
I think one of the bigger challenges is just the remoteness of the area. When we have severe bleaching events like that happened in 2014, it's not like people can be up there every month monitoring. We have to wait till the next cruise is available to head up. But the value of the co-management and conservation of the Northwesterns is emphasized with every trip that comes back, not only those that are monitoring damage to the area, but also those that are making new scientific discoveries. It seems as though every trip that comes back is reporting on a new species of something, including some very deep water corals that seem to be in an area that allows them to escape some of the more immediate pressures of warming and bleaching that the shallow areas are encountering. So that value of areas that are safe might give us clues how we can help those species that are being impacted in more susceptible areas.
But, that's, of course, there's a lot of value to monitoring because you don't know what you're losing if you're not monitoring it. But what do you do when you have something like, half your beach disappears, or, how do you even begin to work with that?
There's a variety of approaches. Actually, there have been proposals that if you lose certain beaches, you could consider replenishing them in certain ways to see if you could try to build it back out a bit. One thing that we have been trying to do at Midway and some of the other islands where we have a more permanent presence is to restore native coastal vegetation which tends to hold our islands better. There was a lot of ecological perturbation in the monument during World War II and in some of the decades prior. I mean, one of the reasons that the wildlife refuges there were set up was because of the egg and feather trade that was decimating the albatross populations. And Laysan, they even had a little railroad that went around so that they could put the eggs in little cars and take them back to the ship landing and haul them off. So in some cases, we're actually putting some of these systems back together again, especially in the terrestrial side of it. That was one of the reasons we brought miller birds back to Laysan from the OHA. Laysan had a miller bird. The miller bird was lost during the days of the, well, after the feather trade, because the people who were up there introduced rabbits, which ate everything. So got rid of the rabbits. There were seeds in the ground that brought some of the native vegetation back. And then finally we restored the bird just 2 years ago.
You know, and I think when we see just devastating things like coral bleaching or any other impact that's being caused by changes in our environment, I think as people, some of us, the immediate reaction is we want to do something right away. The unfortunate reality is that some of the things that are happening are going to take some time for us to deal with. But it's important that when we talk about monitoring, that's really collecting data. And time up there and developing good data sets to try and figure out what's going on is going to be of critical importance. And the thing I would add is that for some of the Hawaiian traditions that are out there, they're more than just stories for us. We view those as data. There's clues in there that tell us things about the environment, tell us things that are about the climate at the time those were being produced.
So these are in the chants or the...
Exactly. Like, for example, the Pele migration, the volcano goddess who we know for being fire and creating islands, her arrival point was actually in the Northwesterns, and they actually sailed from the top, Kure, down. Now, that might just sound like a story, but the important clue there is that the wind pattern is letting them sail that way. If you try to do that on a trade wind day, it's not going to happen.
Right.
So the clue there is that you had southeasterly winds because there's no mention of them having problems with sailing, right?
And now you can't do that?
On a trade wind day,
I
because
see.
in Hawaii we love our trade winds because
Right.
it cools us off.
Right.
But that prevailing wind pattern would get you quick to Kure, but
Right.
coming back, you're going to have some time on your hands. So again, those kind of clues are embedded.
Yeah.
And again, our data that as we understand them and connect the dots, it helps us contribute to that pool of information.
Yeah,
Right.
because face it, we did not have NOAA research vessels in the Hawaiian Islands 500 years ago.
Right.
So,
Those were
any
the
clues
voyaging.
we can get to the past are extremely.
So, and that's the importance of sort of working together on this.
Oh, absolutely. It brings different ways of seeing and different streams of knowledge together, and I think that's been part of what the monument's been about right from the start.
Right.
Yeah, just to touch on it real quick, I mean, for example, we've had cultural practitioners going to some of the islands there for the good part of a decade. Some of those islands are a little bit of a void in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's data set, Mokumanamana in particular. We haven't gotten there yet, but we're hopeful that a lot of the observations that cultural practitioners have been making on the islands for over a decade might help fill some of those gaps. Again, we're still a little ways out from verifying that's going to happen, but I think it's an example of how once we start talking to each other, we realize that there's a lot more similarities and collaboration than historically might have been viewed between scientific communities and cultural communities. And it's some of the special things that are happening in the Northwesterns.
So that's really exciting to see that those gaps are perhaps, the potential to fill those gaps with these the traditional knowledge and so on, the Ike, right? And but what do you do for something where I'm sort of keep bringing us back to the doomsday scenario? What do you say or do when, for example, in the news, they've just talked about 5 or 6 of the Solomon Island archipelago being covered by water because of sea level rise, and those things are obviously coming for us as well.
Well, I mean, obviously we can't necessarily prevent islands from going underwater, but we can anticipate what might happen and try to plan as best we can as managers for those contingencies. And so the first thing is to understand sort of which processes are playing out in the monument, right? Warming oceans, warming islands, rising sea levels. then do some scenario planning looking forward, right? To look at your possible futures. And some of those futures are better than others, although almost all of them are different than what you have now. Then, based on that, you can start to say, okay, we have to anticipate if, say, the turtle breeding islands of French frigate shoals vanish, the turtles are going to look for another place to breed. Where are they likely to show up, right? What actions might we want to take to ensure that some of these other islands that are slightly higher would be suitable, okay, for turtle nesting? And
So would you do some assisted?
well, we have done assisted migration. If you look at the Laysan, I mean, if you look at the Nihoa millerbird back to Laysan, right, that was essentially
Right.
taking something back to a place it had been. There are other problems for us in terms of, once again, if the islands keep on warming, not just the waters, but the islands, we have millions of seabirds that breed on those islands, and they come in and sit on their eggs, and the whole purpose of sitting on your egg is to keep it warm. If the island gets too warm, that's not a problem anymore. The issue you have is you're trying to keep your egg cool. Well, that's not really what seabirds are designed to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you may finally hit a thermal threshold at which it's not going to be possible for the seabirds to viably breed on those islands. Then where do they go, right? Warm down here too. And so they're going to have to look for places further north and perhaps even on the margins of the Pacific in places they don't breed now. And you have to anticipate that and work with other managers.
So it would be outside of their historical
Exactly.
ranges.
I mean, this can become a sort of basin-wide problem, right? Where you
Right.
have to go and talk to people in British Columbia and say, you may have some albatrosses coming your way sooner rather than later.
Right. So another issue that I might see in all of this is because this is uninhabited by humans and it's so far away in our modern psyche. I mean, the Hawaiian Islands to begin with are far away from everything else. Then you're talking about some remote islands within the Hawaiian archipelago. What do you say to people when they want to know, why would it be important to, of course, from the Native Hawaiian side, it would be very important, but, for the global trajectory, why is it important for us to be paying attention to this area that is, already underwater, basically? No, I mean,
Well, you have
just being
tremendous amount of
facetious.
biodiversity up there.
Right.
I mean, I just mentioned seabirds, right? You breed over 1 million Laysan albatross in the monument. It's 95% of the world total for that species and black-footed albatross that breed in those national wildlife refuges up there. Your fish species are highly endemic, which means they're only found in that area. When we just did some recent dives into the mesophotic region, as they call it, down to about 200, 300 feet deeper than scuba divers normally go, we had crews who used specialized rebreather equipment. And they went to Kure and they found that every species they were encountering at 200 to 300 feet was found only in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. 100% endemic. That's very, very unusual in ocean settings because most ocean creatures have pelagic larvae that are carried on the currents. And so many species are very widely distributed. So you have unique components of biodiversity. You have enormous populations of species that really don't breed elsewhere. And a long time ago, I think it was in the 60s, there was a writer named Wallace Stegner who coined a term, the geography of hope. And it was the fact that you've got certain places out there that are undisturbed and people take a certain satisfaction in knowing that they are out there and that way. So they're places that still haven't been developed, paved over, totally altered.
They're
And
still wild places.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think in more recent times that's been called existence value, if you will.
Right.
But certainly I think the Northwesterns have that. I think they are part of that geography of hope.
Right. And I mean, it's like, Antarctica, of course, there's research going on there as well, but the general public doesn't end up sort of touristing down there necessarily.
Well, yeah, exactly. And Arctic's a great example
On
of
the
a part of
Arctic.
the world that we have just by international consensus said we are largely going to leave alone.
Right. And then, so for, taking the more human perspective, when you have so much culture tied in with that area and so on, how do you take that? Of course, to Hawaiians, it is sacred and they know it and so on. Of course, there are some who don't, and you kind of get the word out there. But how do you take your message to the rest of the world? Is there a larger effort that you are a part of, or working with some other indigenous groups, or even going beyond that to, for example, just global efforts to conserve biodiversity?
Well, definitely. I think when you look at Papahānaumokuākea, she might have been one of the first large-scale marine protected areas in the world in 2006. In the 10 years since, the Great Barrier Reef is the grandmother of us all, but Papahānaumokuākea really began a trend over the last decade for large-scale marine protected areas, and that ability to connect with other managers, including those native managers, is of critical importance to share lessons learned.
Very good, and we'll come back after a quick break and we'll carry on a little bit more with the co-management and the cultural and natural resource aspect. So this is Climate Change Beyond Outrage, and don't go away. Well, go away just for a little bit and come back.
Aloha, my name is Josh Green. I'm a senator from the Big Island. I work in the ER there. But on Tuesday afternoons, I get to come and spend 45 minutes to an hour with Jay Fidel and the Think Tech staff. They're terrific professionals. They help us to bring some of the leading cutting-edge topics here across our state to you. So you can join us at our show on healthcare in Hawaii to talk with leaders from across all the spectrum of health in our state, or you can join us for any other show where we talk about economic development or tourism or some really eclectic programs too. So really, we love to see you here on our show. Thanks for joining us and thanks for supporting us.
Welcome back to Climate Change Beyond Outrage, and this is Anu Hittel in the studio with Dan Polhemus from Fish and Wildlife Service and Keola Lindsey from Office of Hawaiian Affairs. We're talking about the National Marine Monument, Papahānaumokuākea, and its cultural and biodiversity values to really the globe. Yes, and so what kinds of efforts? In what way are we adapting to, we know this is all going to change because that's what climate change will do, is change things, but how do we go beyond that and say this is how we will adapt, this is what we need to do?
Well, I think one realization we have to have starting out is the fact that things are going to change. If we just want to try to hold the monument as a time capsule in the face of a changing planet, that's not going to happen. And so it simply won't be possible. So we have to anticipate that change is going to occur. Some species may, in fact, despite our best efforts, simply no longer find the monument suitable, but other species are going to move in. We'd rather that those be native species from perhaps elsewhere in the Hawaiian Islands. We'd rather not have the monument overrun with invasive species, although that's always a danger in the modern world. And that's one of the reasons we have very stringent protocols for both our vessels and our people. The vessels, before they go up there, have to have their hulls inspected and, if necessary, cleaned so that we don't take marine organisms up there that shouldn't be in the monument. We also, anyone who goes on land has to have a brand new set of clothes for each island they get onto. Those clothes have to have been frozen, bought new and frozen. So, and that's been protocols that have been going on for many, many tens of years. But the bottom line is that there are natural processes that are simply going to play out of change and species turnover. That's almost inevitable. But we are trying to prevent, say, complications of those processes by organisms that shouldn't be up there to begin with, invasives, for instance.
Just to clarify, though, when you say that there are natural processes, I mean, the whole issue with climate change, though, is that these processes are being disrupted, and that's to some degree these are happening faster than would be natural.
That's the key point.
Right,
it's not
and so
the
that's
rate of change, I mean the amplitude of change.
Right.
Because if you look at the ice ages, 20,000 years ago, I mean many of our cities were under several miles of ice if they're far enough north in the United States. But it's the fact that we have amplified the rate of change now. So it's turning over much faster, and organisms have a certain adaptational capacity if they have enough time to let that play out, right?
Right, and that's not necessarily, the time is really what we don't have necessarily.
That's becoming an increasing problem for many organisms, I think, is just the rate of change they're faced with.
So having established that there is a rate of change that's perhaps greater than what most species will adapt to, and I just wanted to go back a little bit into the Hawaiian ike, or knowledge of that area. And earlier when you and I were talking, we had talked a little bit about how that ike is something that has not necessarily always been there. You had some and then lost some, and then now we're trying to reestablish some more. And that's all sort of a part of that remembering. And I wondered if you could speak to that a little more, and just how will the pace of that work with something where we're trying to get solutions quickly, maybe not just this very minute, but certainly quicker than we've had to in the past.
Yeah, earlier when I was talking about the Pele migrations, I mentioned this idea of changing wind patterns, a changing environment. And some of our scholars are actually coming up with some fairly strong ideas that there was a significant change in wind patterns about 400 years ago that actually began a process of making it a lot harder than it already was for our people to get up there traditionally. So when you're not in a place, while you can remember some things about it, the less you're there, obviously, and that applies to anyone anywhere, right? The harder it is to remember and really take the knowledge that you're remembering and apply it to your life. So beginning with in the early 1990s, when management really started to be formed for the Northwesterns, there was also a process of remembering place for a lot of different interests, but including Hawaiians to start voyaging up there, to start experiencing place. Because like we were talking about earlier, it really is a race against time. It's a race against time not only to gain knowledge, but figure out how to apply it to deal with change. Papahanaumokuakea is a World Heritage Site as well. One of the key attributes of that World Heritage inscription is voyaging and wayfinding. Our canoe Hokulea is sailing around the world right now. But Papahanaumokuakea is a seascape with the birds and the fish and all of these natural signs that are so important as their patterns change, as they adapt to the world around them. We need to have a good, strong foundation built on remembering knowledge now to be able to adapt with them. So again, it takes being in that place, but the pressure's on because, like we were talking about earlier, we don't have a lot of time to patiently reconstruct this situation.
Right. And I have another question for you, but just before we segue into that, I wanted to just say that perhaps we could see some of the photos that we have of the canoes and the birds and so on. So if you just wanted to sort of bring those up on the computer, and we'll just, on the screen, and we'll just display those. But maybe you could speak to some of these.
Yeah, so these are some of the bird species on cultural sites on the island of Mokumanamana, where I was mentioning cultural practitioners in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are working very closely together to share knowledge and try to figure out how that can apply to management there.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, and here we have another one.
This is an actual picture from the canoe of some of the apprentice navigators, learning from some of the master navigators up there. Master navigators call the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands the ideal training ground for navigation in Hawaii. Yeah. This is the voyaging canoe Hikianalia on the backside of Nihoa. They were up there last summer, 2015, along with a scientific expedition, collaborating and working together. Nihoa is one of the islands that's in the National Wildlife Refuge up there. That is now part of Papahānaumokuakea as well.
That's a beautiful picture.
Yeah, this is the English name is a white tern. In Hawaiian, it's manuoku. This is a navigation bird. When navigators see this bird heading one way or the other in the evening or morning, they know land is close by. So
right,
again, an indicator.
Right, it goes out a certain number of miles and then it's back in. Yeah.
Definitely,
okay.
definitely. And then another picture of the, in Hawaiian, it's a. In English,
Uprights.
uprights. No, the birds.
Oh, the birds. I thought you were talking about the cultural feature.
Yeah.
Boobies.
Yeah. So again, it's a place where everything is integrated together, and the of the U.S. right now. I was just watching on the news this morning that the crew is meeting with some folks on an island off the east coast of the U.S., talking about how their island's going to be impacted if sea level comes up. So what a powerful scene that we're painting, right? A traditional canoe from Hawaii meeting folks off the U.S. East Coast, talking about how the world's going to change. And to me, that emphasizes this is all of us working together to face a really serious challenge to make sure our kids and the next generations have a world and resources to live with.
And what a wonderful way of ending this episode, just emphasizing that work, the coordination, and the co-management of this precious, precious resource. So thank you both for being with us and for continuing to do this work for us. And we will be back next Tuesday, Climate Change Beyond Outrage, Tuesday at 1 o'clock. This is Anu Hittel. Aloha, namaskar, and goodbye.